Thanks, Jin. Thanks, everyone. Especially thank you for coming on this snowy morning at 10 a.m. Very gamer unfriendly hours. Thanks, Jin. So like Jin said, just going to talk you through my journey within esports. It's quite a long, winding story through many different kind of stages and eras of esports, and I think very different to how it is now, but hopefully the lessons that I've learned over the years can also help you and benefit you, so you don't have to go through those yourself. Kind of the expectations of going into league ops, your first steps and so on for events and participating and organizing events. Just a general overview of league ops as well, the start of an event to the finish. Some ideas of tips and things that you kind of need to create a mindset for, and ideas that you need to have in order to kind of succeed in esports, and don't let it kind of overrun your life too much. Then some do's and don'ts when getting contracted for events, and finishing with a bit of a Q&A. So starting with my journey. I think in about 2001 or 2002, a good friend of mine handed me a copy of Call of Duty 1. Before then, I've just been playing single-player games. Doom was always a big favorite of mine. But Call of Duty 1 was really where it started, multiplayer games for me. So maybe this was before many of you were born even. But back then, I was just playing on servers. It kind of really started when United Offensive came out, and I started playing more competitively, started playing tournaments and so on, started creating tournaments with friends. And Call of Duty 2, started participating in something called Clan Base, which you probably don't know, but it's quite similar to ESCA nowadays, or ESL, or Face It, the ladder system, where you played with your team and you were just trying to rank highest. And it was kind of the only thing you could play in back then. So that was where I kind of went to like a semi-professional level of playing. Then unfortunately for me, Call of Duty 4 came out, and I didn't really enjoy the modern warfare theme of the spray and pray kind of gameplay. But I absolutely loved the community that I was in. So I was kind of figuring out, what can I do? So I went to the team I was playing with and said, how can I stay involved? And I said, well, why don't you just be our manager, whatever that means. So I was, organizing matches, schedules, looking for sponsors. I remember at the time I was looking for sponsors, and in the game servers you saw people with their clan tag, and then the sponsor name, SteelSeries, QPad, Razer, Intel. And people started to use this tag called esports. And I never seen that before in my life. So I was like, what is this? And can they sponsor me? Well, obviously not, but I didn't know what it was. So I started Googling. Nothing came up at all. Started asking people with the tag, what is it? And they said, esports is competitive gaming. I was like, what is this? Some sort of weird philosophy to life? I don't know if you know Ted Lasso, football is life. That's how it kind of felt to me. But many awkward conversations later I understood competitive gaming or esports is just a different word for competitive gaming. So that was kind of my first interaction with the word esports. Anyway, back to my role as manager. I also started writing for the website for the team, and being involved with pro players. A lot of the other pro players of other teams, they kind of knew me. So they started feeding me news of roster changes and being picked up by big organizations who started coming into the scene, and I was always out first with the news. So at some point, Fnatic approached me, and they said, we'll give you $200 a month, and you can write for us about our Call of Duty team and all the other Call of Duty teams out there. So, I think I was about 16-year-old, so $200 was, no pocket change for me at the time. And, it also went a long way with kind of convincing my parents that, this is not just a stupid hobby. I can actually get paid doing this thing. And from there on, I kind of proactively within Fnatic, started asking what can I do more. Started editing articles of others when I noticed mistakes and so on. And eventually became their editor-in-chief. And kind of there fell in love, not necessarily with the journalistic part, but with managing people and so on, and the content on the website. From there on, I actually did a 3-month internship from my college, moved to London, and worked from the office for Fnatic, and kind of had a sort of general manager role, interacting a lot with players and so on. And after doing that, I kind of fell out of love with working for a team because it's quite restrictive. You can't cheer for any other team, for example. So I decided, I'd just quit and focus on my studies for now. But the itch started coming quite quickly. I think about 1 or 2 months after I started my own website called Shootmania Esports. Shootmania at the time was a new fast-paced shooter by Ubisoft who were trying to, take over the market and compete with Counter-Strike. But there was this one player, he was called Sturmy. I knew him from the Fnatic Call of Duty, Quake team. And he was always winning the MVP award, so I was interviewing him a lot for the website. So at some point he contacted me and was like, I'm working on this project, this gaming platform with a bunch of other guys. Why don't you have a call with one of my co-founders and we see if it's something that's interested to you. So I think I had a call the day after. I was on a flight to meet these guys, and I think about 5 minutes into our conversation there, I shook hands and signed my contract with Faceit. This was very early on in the company. It was 2012. I was probably the first non-developer to work for the company. So I was in charge of just community management, organizing any tournaments, any press release, any social media, a bit of finance and accounting, travel, accommodation, anything that wasn't coding, really. I think at some point my title was even VP of Marketing, even though I didn't do any marketing. But anyways, within that, obviously the company grew and grew to what you know it as now. And I became the director of esports for Faceit. So what that means for Faceit is esports is anything to do with the professional events and anything to do with players within those professional events. So you can think from negotiating participation with teams, that goes to if there's revenue share, if there's, what kind of agreements there are for rights and images and so on, to player travel accommodation and the topic we're going to be talking about today, league operations, is a big part of it. Obviously last summer Faceit and ESL merged and got bought by the PIF, or the Savvy Gaming. And for me that was kind of the end of a chapter. After 10 years of working there, I decided, okay, this for me is a moment and a good moment to step out and let other people take control. And since then I've just been kind of enjoying not working for a bit. Anyway, the lessons that I've taken over the course of my career is always outwork another person, but do it smartly. You can work 16 hours a day, but at the end of the day you'll be exhausted, and the next day you'll be exhausted, and the day after you'll be exhausted, and your output will definitely be less than if you work hours that are functional for you. And for everyone that's different. That can be a 9 to 5, that can be a 5 p.m. to 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. It's up to you, but try and find something that, hours that work for you, where you can be effective and not just work hours for the sake of working hours. Always be proactive. In general, problems don't solve themselves. I think also by being proactive, you get much more opportunities thrown at you. But on the other side, you need to be careful not to be taken advantage of. So, make sure that you get your own job done first, and then start reaching out to others how you can help them. Then knowing your strengths and weaknesses. My career kind of started from journalism, but I'm not a native English speaker. So my strength was never writing long articles, like Thor and Richard Lewis. I would never be able to compete with those guys because my English language is somewhat limited. So that was definitely a weakness of mine. But my strength was I knew these players because I was involved with the more professional side of the scene. So I used that to leverage my position as the go-to journalist for very simple news articles and breaking news stories. So figure out what you're good at, figure out also what you're bad at, and try to avoid that and make the most out of your strengths. Creating processes will just save you so much time. With Faceit, we used a lot of Google Docs for anything, for brackets, for round robin. But we always had one basically God document which had all the sort of formats that there were, so you could just copy and paste it when you did a new event. And any sort of process that you can create which just saves you time, go for it. And getting your foot in the door, you might not necessarily always be doing the thing that you like within esports, but as long as you get your foot in that door, you can create the path for you, where you want to go, set out your goals, what you want to achieve, and work your way to it, even though you're currently maybe not in a place that you want to be. And yeah, like I said, there's no one path to success. Like, I never wanted to be a journalist, but it led me to kind of the place which I did enjoy, which was more of a manager side of things. So League Ops, where does it start? Where does it finish? It's quite a broad position. I think everything within an event depends on it. Without a strong League Ops team, your broadcast is going to be delayed, and you kind of set the standard of how a tournament is going to look like and function. So your first step is starts usually with an RFP. Does everyone know what an RFP is? So RFP is a request for a proposal. This usually comes from a client you're working with, which is usually a game developer. So they set out basically a document, they send it to all the big tournament organizers, and they say, we want to organize this event for this game, this date range, we want to involve these teams in this region, we want to do it online, offline, and so on. Can you send us a presentation which outlines your ideas of how you could best achieve this? Your budget, how much money you think you'll spend, and so on. Another way it can start is someone within the company, they have an idea, everyone agrees it's a great idea, you think you can make it somewhat profitable, and the process then starts the same way, or a sponsor comes to you and says, we want to do something. So you start off creating a format. Usually the client has something in mind already, so you work from that. You work on your format, your schedule, and then you think, okay, with this format, I might need this many people to, function properly. So things you got to keep in mind is, if there's 2 teams on stage, that means I need 2 admins at least, but those admins need a break. We have back-to-back matches, so that already needs 4 people. And so on. And based on all this information, you create a budget. So, how much, the people you're going to hire cost more or less, hotels, travel, amount of teams that are participating, which region, you just go on any website and you figure out more or less the prices of the flights. That's your portion within the presentation, and it then goes back to the game developer. Obviously, the broadcast team will provide their portion, the graphics team will provide their portion, and together that will be packaged and sent back to the client. Hopefully, then you get the green light, you get the product. So you start hiring staff, you go into contract negotiations and so on. You start inviting the teams and the players that you want to have attending. You start creating a rule book. Discords is quite important actually, where you invite the teams and they can actually contact you for conversations and questions. Booking the travel and accommodation, you try and do as quick as possible to keep costs as low as possible. And you make welcome guides for both the players and your staff. Probably while you're working on this, there's going to be a public announcement. Again, for League Ops, it's quite important to be involved in this because there's going to be a press release out there which is going to say which teams are participating, what the dates are, what the format is. So you you're always going to have to give it a check over to check if that's all right. You're going to work with your PR team or marketing team or social media team to make sure that everything is correct in that. Then you start your briefings. So you send out the briefings to the teams. You might have a call with a representative to kind of lay out how the event is going to work and function, who to contact. Then you're going to have another call with your staff to explain them how everything is going to go. Obviously then everyone travels to the event. You start the execution of the event, and then you just have the general league operations. The kind of what to expect on that. I'll go in a bit deeper, but I think things that people often forget is you're always reporting back to your client. So you're writing reports for them to make sure that they have all the information. If something goes wrong, you write a report. You send it to them so they have an explanation. At the end of every day, you update the team with, this is what you can expect tomorrow. This time you have to be here. This is your schedule for tomorrow. These are the standings. And you're also working with your social media team to make sure that they put out the right graphics, they have the right matches and so on. And often you're talking with talent as well because they have confusion about if this team wins, which team is going to go through into the next round. So they often have questions for you as well. Then hopefully everything went well. Your event finishes. You make sure everyone gets home safely. You make sure that the trophy gets shipped to the winning team. You start contacting the teams afterwards for prize money. So you send them the details for like, this is the amount you won. These are the details of the company you need to invoice to. And another report for your client and teams often to say like, this many viewers and so on. This went wrong, this went right. So lots of reporting, which is the most fun part. What to expect starting working events. Definitely very long and exhausting days. Most esports events, the match times take 12 hours. Expect to be at the venue 2-3 hours before. Expect to still be there at least an hour after. And this is on days where things go well. So you're looking at 16-hour days often. Luckily, I think a lot of the organizers are slowly moving to less exhausting days, maybe longer weeks, but your days are a bit shorter. But yes, definitely expect to be tired by the end of the week. You'll enter first your fee or your contract negotiations with whoever contracts you. I think things that you need to look out for. Usually these are quite standard contracts and you can trust that they're all right, but definitely give them a good read. So things that you need to look out for is payment terms. Are they paying me within 30 days or 60 days is acceptable as well? Are they paying for hotel and accommodation? Are they paying for my travel? You can assume they are, but definitely check in your contract that it says so. Check the description of your work that everything's correct. You might want to check if there's physical work involved. Some event organizers have crews for setting up PCs and desks and chairs, some don't. So if it's something that you don't want to do, make sure to check before, because if you didn't ask, expect the expectation for you to do it to be there. Make sure that you're covered on like Uber receipts. Can you invoice your taxis? Can you invoice your food? How is food in general arranged? Just so that you don't make any costs that cancel out, the fee that you agreed on. Then you figure out how your travel and hotels work. Which hotel you're staying in. How am I coming? Am I flying? Am I taking a train? Like I said, it should all be provided for you, but double check everything. You'll receive a pre-event briefing, which will basically outline dress code, teams attending, format, schedule, how many hours you can expect to work. Basically, anything that you need to know. And you should be getting the rule book, which you should definitely read very in-depth. Spend a good couple of hours on reading that through. It's usually very painful material, but it's quite important to not know every single line, but if something happens, you need to know where to reference to. So if you search through the document, you quickly know, okay, I need to go up to point 6.3 or whatever. Do your research on the game. You might be doing games that you're not necessarily that familiar with. So play the game, look at the teams that are participating, look at past events, and make sure that you know as much as possible about the game, and if something happens, that you know how to deal with the issue. You'll be traveling to the event, and obviously at the event you'll be briefed. Usually the head admin will brief you. They'll tell you, what kind of atmosphere there is expected. So are you being strict, or is it quite casual? What times will you be working? Which matches will you be assigned to? This is obviously a good moment to also ask any questions that you may have. Then the starting day, you'll be doing your match operations, which generally mean if you're up on stage, you'll be first of all collecting phones and so on, helping teams set up, putting in SSDs in the PCs, and generally, I think the most important part is you'll be on comms with your head admin, and if you're expecting delays or something because a player is having issues with his headset, which is usually the issue, let them know so you can anticipate. Let broadcast know, like, okay, we might be 5 minutes late. I think an important thing on this is don't be afraid to over communicate. That's definitely better than under communicating. So give as much information as you can, but be brief and be clear with what's going on. Once your match is over, you'll help whoever is adminning the next match with this kind of swap over of SSDs and so on, and then you can go to the toilet, you can have your lunch, but obviously check in with your head admin to make sure that you can go actually, and there's no any urgent things that need to be done. The entire day, keep your phone with you. There'll be definitely a WhatsApp group where if someone is needed or something is needed, you'll be alerted on there, and you'll be expected to be at the ready at any time. After the event is over, you'll travel home. I would suggest as soon as you're home to do an invoice. If you don't know how to do an invoice, there's many examples by Googling. You can just download something. I always tend to send an example invoice to admins I work with for the first time, so you can expect it. And something that I think not enough people tend to do is ask for feedback after the event. I rarely got asked, even though I work with a lot of people who did events for the first time. But it's always something that's, when someone did it, it stuck with me that they're eager to learn. And if you feel like the atmosphere was good, you can always send feedback as well. Not everyone might be eager to receive it, but if you feel like there was a good relationship and atmosphere, or feel free if you felt that something could be managed better to send that back as well. So some things that are a good mindset to have, and some tips is learn to read a room. I've had admins who were backstage. A team just lost and came off the stage, and an admin saying, "Do I need to teach you how to play the game?" He meant it as a joke, obviously, but the players didn't consider it a joke, and we got a complaint after about this person, and I probably wouldn't hire that person again. In general, I think most people are, or most tournament organizers are fine with you joking around with players, when you're setting up and so on. You want there to be quite a casual atmosphere. At the end of the day, everyone is quite young, so we shouldn't be too serious about it. But once they're set up and practicing and warming up, just leave them alone. Be empathetic. I think not enough people are nowadays in general in life, but I think especially within the role as League Ops is really important. You can either come in and say, like, this is how it's done, this is what you need to do, and straight away you're going to cause friction with whoever you're talking with. You're in a position where there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different points of interest. One team will want one thing, the next team will want another. The best way to approach is to listen to whatever this team is complaining about. Tell them, like, I understand where you're coming from, and then counter their arguments, or say, like, okay, I understand, we're going to fix it. But first listen to what they have to say rather than come barging in and say, like, this is how we do it. Problem solve. Obviously, every single event you're going to run into an issue. You're going to have monitors without cables. You're going to have people traveling in late. You can't really stop and think about the problem for too long. Obviously, identify it and then try and figure out the solutions as quick as possible. So if you don't have the cables, right, call the supplier who supplied the monitors first and say like, look, this is the issue. Can you help us? You'll probably get a no because the monitors will be shipped from far away. So then you start calling basically every single shop there is. But the reality is I have never started an event where I was missing cables and couldn't find a solution somehow. The Commonwealth Esports Championship we did here last summer, we were missing cables and Confetti came in clutch, supplying us with cables. So there's always a way to find a solution, and you really need to have that mindset of knowing you're gonna find a solution. Let's not stress out about it, let's just work on it. You're gonna want to consider every single outcome. You're gonna have to make a lot of decisions, which are gonna have all different, again, points of views of different people who want different things. An example that is very common is if players are on stage, they always hate these lights. They always complain about it. Obviously, your broadcast team wants these lights to highlight the players and be able to see them properly on the camera, but the players, they find it distracting. They can't see their screen properly. It's not the same as they're used to playing at home. Now, obviously, your solution is tell them, deal with it. Or your other solution is going to broadcast and see, like, can we lower them? Now, if you tell a player, deal with it, the most likely consequence is they're going to throw a fit. So you're probably going to get a delay. They're going to threaten you with boycotting the event and so on. They're probably going to play, but they're going to complain on Twitter afterwards, definitely. Your broadcast team might be happy, but most people won't be happy because there's complaints on Twitter. So if you lower the light, players will be happy. They might even tweet something positive. Broadcasters might be a little less happy. The only danger which you start running into when you have these sort of considerations is that often with players is if you give them an inch, they'll try and go a mile. They'll definitely try and test the waters and see how far they can go. So at some point you do need to put your foot down and say like, this is it. Very important to consider in every single aspect of League Ops from start to finish is what are the goals of the competition, of your client, of you as a tournament organizer. Often for you as League Ops, the two things that you're considering is the competitor or the show, which is the most important part. For the competitor, it's important to have as many games as possible because that will give the outcome of the best team winning. For the better teams, that's important. For the lower level teams, it's important because they can play as much and they enjoy playing. For the show, that might not always be great because if you have a lot of games, you might not be able to broadcast every single game. The format might be more confusing. It's harder to explain on camera and the storylines will get murky. So you need to consider which one is more important for your client. You also need to consider long-term versus short-term outcome of anything that you're doing. Example of this is back in about, I think, 2015, there was a big rivalry between Faceit, which was organizing ECS, and ESL, which was organizing EPL and Counter-Strike. We were fighting for players for both leagues, kind of doing the same thing. We're all trying to get the community and the players on our sides. So at the time, there was a lot of DDoSing going on. Every single match was delayed, basically, or cancelled or rescheduled. So what Faceit did, we helped the players and we said, like, okay, it sucks that you're getting DDoS, so we're going to reschedule the match, or you're late to our match because your previous match in EPL was getting DDoS, so you're half an hour late. We're saying, okay, fine, you're getting DDoS, it's not your fault. So, Reddit, Twitter, everything, fans, players were all really positive about it. You're being helpful and supporting us. Now, what ESL did, they said, you're either going to be on time or, you're going to get a penalty. Obviously, lots of negativity around it. Now, that might sound obvious option is you're going to help the players in this, you take the road that Faceit did. Now, the long-term consequence of what Faceit was doing was players were not taking any action. What was happening was fine. Faceit would deal with the issues. If we were late, who cares? Now, with what ESL was doing, players had to actually change. And, they started getting multiple connections in. They started actually figuring out how to use VPNs. And over time, the issue of DDoSing got fixed because of this. So, obviously, Faceit, their entire goal as a platform and as a organizer is to work with players. So they did that. But ESL was there thinking more long-term, what is good for the industry. So, there's no right and wrong on that. It's just something that you need to consider of what is more important for you, and that usually goes with company strategy and so on. And it's a question you need to ask. What is important. Use all the resources available. There's a lot of stuff already out there, whether that's in esports or in regular sports. I remember we did the Rainbow Six EU League, and Ubisoft loves reporting. Obviously, it's a massive company, so for them, if their esports manager who deals with their esports circuit has to every time explain if there was an issue to every single person what was going on, he's going to be spending his entire time explaining. So if they get a report, they can just forward it. Now, we had a certain bug which was happening during games, and we were like, okay, what's the best way to report this and make sure that everyone is aware of what's happening and explain it the best way possible. So I'm a very vivid F1 fan, and they have the incident report. So I looked at the incident reports and was like, okay, how can we use this for our problem? And we adjusted it and we sent it to Ubisoft, and they absolutely loved it because it was just a very clear way. So, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. See what's out there and apply it to how it's necessary for you. Creating a rule book, again, there's a lot of resources already out there available, but it's important for you to kind of rewrite your rule book in a way that works for you, in mind with the goals of your event. Are you strict or are you more, calm about situations? And writing your rule book will definitely help you kind of reference if there's an issue, exactly where to go in your rule book. And finally, learn how to use Excel and Google Sheets. I was definitely never very good at it, but thankfully I had some colleagues who were. So basically, what you want is you have a Google Sheet which has the scores, which has the standings, which has the schedule and so on. You don't want to update every single tab. You want to update one, and then everything references to the other ones. So it's a very important skill to have. Not many people, I would say, in League Ops have it. So if it's something that you can understand, and it's a lot of kind of coding language, but if it's something that intrigues you, it's definitely a useful skill to have, and something that I would suggest to work on. Now, some do's and don'ts. Don't use your childhood email. I've seen many Captain Killers or Sergeant Rooney or whatever. You start off on the wrong foot there, and you look quite unprofessional. Also, use your full name. It's fine to have a nickname, but if I'm working with you, I want to know your name. So start off with your actual name. Don't do things a certain way because they've always been done that way. That's, to be honest, something that I've only started figuring out the most recent years. It's the easy thing to always say is like, if you get the question, why do you do it that way? Well, we've always done it that way. But the reality is esports changes so much that after every single event, you kind of want to review your rules and your processes. And you definitely want to listen to people. For me, guys like yourself, who come in with a fresh point of view. If you ask the question of why is that a certain way, it means it's not clear to people. So I need to change something in order to make that clear or make that point better. Don't be passive. Like we said before, problems won't solve themselves. I've had many times where I sat on something and hoped that it kind of would just go away. Every single time it blew up in my face. And the problem was way worse. So just get ahead of it and tackle it straight away. Finally, don't over-engage with players. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have fun with them or you can't have a chat with them. But esports has been professionalizing very quickly, and we're all young people, so I've seen many times after the day is over, someone having a beer with one of the players. Now, in the past that was fine, but there's a lot of rules nowadays about what admins can and can't do, what's considered bribery, what's considered conflicts of interest. Now, obviously, you're not meaning anything bad by having a beer, but imagine now that your opposing team of the player who's playing, they might play tomorrow, see you having a beer with that other player, and the next day you have a situation where one of the teams has an issue, you need to make a decision, it goes the way that with the player that you're having a beer with. Obviously, you know what the first reaction is going to be. They've been bribed, they're friends with these guys. So just try, after your working day is done, try and avoid hanging out with players. Even if they're your friends, you can hang out with them after the event is over, but during the event, try and avoid it because it's murky water. Now, finishing on a bit more of a positive note, try to find your answers before asking. Not saying that because questions are bad. Questions are good. But in general, what I found out as someone who came through esports by, a random way basically, and had to kind of figure out my way through it, is that all the things that I had to Google myself because there was no one to tell me how to do it, stuck with me much more. So if you have a question, first try and Google it, because by searching it and you get much more context around your question, and where if you ask someone you might forget within 3 months, you might not remember the answer, but if you Google it yourself, you'll remember much better. Then do ask the question if you can't remember, or if you can't find the answer. In general, also, if there's something you feel is unclear with welcome guides, with rule books, ask the question, even if you know the answer, but you feel it's unclear. Ask the question, because if you have that question, probably players are going to have that question too. So it's useful for, in this instance, it would be useful for me to know that it's not unclear so that I can fix it. Try and bond with your colleagues. That doesn't mean you have to go to the pub afterwards. If that's not your thing, that's not your thing. But during, the hours that you're working, my most memorable events were with the people that I enjoyed working with, and when there was just a nice and relaxed atmosphere. So, try and make an effort. You might not get along with everyone, but make the effort. Always be friendly. It's simple. A smile often solves an issue. If you come in to a tense situation and you're looking angry, you're only going to make it worse. If you're there being friendly, you have a smile on your face, you're going to solve a solution much easier. And finally, wear some suitable clothes. I've nothing wrong with sweatpants or t-shirts or anything, but I've seen too many body parts that I didn't want to see during an event when someone was crawling underneath a desk. So make sure that that is not the case, because it's very unpleasant for me, but also for your players, and it just looks unprofessional. Now, if you guys have any questions, I think now is the time to ask those. Thank you.
Obviously, in esports, we have a lot of formats, and generally it changes by what kind of game you're playing. But I was wondering, when you decide what tournament format to use, I think a lot of people believe that double elimination is maybe one of the most competitive formats. But then I think a big problem with that format is then, do you, in the finals, when you have the winners finals and losers finals, for the grand finals, do you give the winners finalist an advantage? Is there some kind of reset? So yeah, I was just wondering what your thoughts on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a very simple answer, because every game is different. in CS:GO, for example, it's quite normal to have just a map veto advantage. So it really depends on the game. What's the standard for those kind of things? And like I said, it kind of all comes back to the goals that you have as a competition. So do you prioritize your players or do you prioritize your broadcast? And someone within the process of starting an event will tell you what their priority is, but always ask, whether that's your manager or the client, whoever. You can always ask them, like, what is your goal? Do you want to have players talking positively about you, or do you want to have a really good show? So within that, obviously, the easiest format to understand for anyone is a single elimination bracket. It's easy to broadcast. You can usually do every single match. So that's one side of the spectrum. The other side is like a Swiss format or something where you have lots of matches, or round robin with lots of teams in the same group. But it's really dependent on per game. Every game has their own standard. So you look at what there is in the game and you work with that. If you want to make tweaks to make it a bit different, you can. But usually I think players and esports community is quite set in their way. So you don't want to go too far and make it too exotic.
Hi. When you first receive an RFP, and you've obviously got the mammoth task of creating a tournament, what's the first thing you would do to try and make that first step towards getting a tournament done and planned out?
Well, usually your first step is complaining about how short of a time you have of providing the presentation. You generally want a month or so, and you usually get maybe a week. Your first step is you obviously you read through the RFP, and that will clarify a lot in itself. What kind of format they're thinking? Is it LAN? Is it online? What's the date spectrum? How many hours per day do they want to broadcast? And based on that information, you start working on your format. So you just kind of play around with what's out there. Like I just said, if it's a Dota event, you look at a certain format. If it's a CS event, you look at a certain format, and you try and work within, what's been provided by the client to fit that in there. If you can't, you can make a suggestion which fits within their structure or whatever they want. Maybe you don't have enough time for the usual formats that you see. So you provide an option for that, but then you also provide an option saying, like, look, this game, you'll get negative feedback if you do this. So here's another option that we think is more suitable, which might take more time or whatever. But the option is up to the client to then decide. And from there, once you have your format, you can build your schedule, and based on that, you can build your staffing. So it's quite straightforward after that.
For people who are new to event organizing, is there any sort of issues that commonly trip people up when they're new, or issues that commonly occur?
The difficulty is getting in there. People are gonna hire people that they know because they know their experience, they know how to work with them. So I think making that first step into being an admin or player manager is also a good solution if you're starting. It's quite difficult. Obviously, with Confetti, you get a lot more opportunities. Like I said, we did the Commonwealth Games here last year and worked with a lot of students to organize something. And they have, first of all, something on their CV already to provide to the next tournament organizer. And not so much for me because I'm not working for Faceit anymore, but whoever took over my job there now has a list of people that we've worked with and we're positive about. So the main problem you'll face is making that first step of getting the first thing on your CV. And a good step for that is trying online stuff as well. Platforms like Faceit need a lot of admins to manage. So they have a lot of volunteer positions or base pay positions. So it's a good place to start just to get something on your CV.
Is there anything for when people are doing this for the first time that you commonly see people make a mistake or something like that?
Definitely passiveness. They're afraid to ask questions. They're afraid to, they don't really know what to do, which is fair enough. But, what you want is people to step forward and ask, like, okay, what do you want me to do now? Even if you're feeling you're being annoying, it's probably a good thing that you're asking the questions rather than sitting around doing nothing. You don't necessarily have to ask your manager. It can also be a colleague. Like, do you need any help? Do you need anything? So yeah, definitely passiveness is a big issue I've seen in the past.
Is there any negative feedback or constructive criticism that's really like stuck with you through the like past years?
Well, nothing comes up, so I guess no. I think feedback that we often got with Face It from players is that we weren't being strict enough, funny enough. That's something that stuck with me, not necessarily from any admin or so on who worked for me, but yeah, that's the main feedback we got from teams sometimes, that we were too lenient. So it was always difficult to balance being strict when you need to be strict, but also, following that kind of company policy of being players first. But I think from admin perspective in general, like I said, don't often get people asking for feedback, so let alone sending feedback is a very rare thing. But I think, like I said, if your connection is good with your manager, always feel free to do that. If you feel, that he's a bit stubborn, try and avoid it and just ask for feedback.
I imagine you have, but how difficult do you find it to be a league ops or do league ops remotely? So you're not at the event, or it's an online event, and you're far away from the players, and all communication has to be done through Discord or stuff like that.
I would say generally it's actually easier to do it online because you have all the communication in one place. You don't have to run over to a stage. The only difficulty is that if a player is not in his seat at an event, you can run to the bathroom or wherever he or she may be to grab. If they're at home, usually nowadays you have cameras of every single player. You just have to wait until he sits back and spam their manager or whatever to get them back in the seat. But in general, it tends to be easier because you have everything on your Discord. You have your match, which you can watch, as an observer or whatever. And probably the best part is if there's any technical issues, it's usually not your problem to deal with. It's the player's problem to deal with. It's not your PC breaking or your internet connection dying. It's on the player side, which makes life much easier because you can just say like, okay, this is your problem. If you're late or whatever it says your rule book about being late or whatever, you can just follow that. Rather than if it's an issue of the venue or your PCs, it's players will start complaining and being unsettled because you need to fix it as quick as possible. So there's much more pressure on you there.
And I think most people in this room and generally know Face It for Counter-Strike. What other games have you done? And what, I guess with the amount of experience that Face It has in Counter-Strike, what problems and solutions have you found with other games, and has that helped you in your Counter-Strike tournaments?
Yeah, many other games. Face It actually started with Quake, so that's the background. And then when CS:GO came out, I think we did some Counter-Strike Source as well before CS:GO came out. And then CS:GO, obviously, we've done Dota events. We've done Rocket League events. It was something called Universal Open. We did with NBC in the US. We've done Rocket League at the X Games. We've done the Commonwealth Esports Championship, which had eFootball, Dota, and another game I can't remember actually. We've done fighting games, so everything that you can think of, we've basically done it. But what Face It often does is they do white label events. So it's basically a client comes to you, says we want to do this event, and all the branding will be around the client. So you won't necessarily see Faceit anything. The client will just pay Faceit to the broadcast, to the league operations, and so on. So all the big organizers that you know about, Faceit, ESL, PGL, Blast, they often do much more than you actually see, because a lot of things are white label. Then challenges in CSGO and how other games help with that. I think CSGO is definitely the most difficult game there is, because players are very well paid. They're often quite young and they don't really know the struggles of the previous generations of players have gone through. They came into the game when it was really big, and the standards are really high already. So, the travel for them is often business class. The hotels are 5-star hotels. So it's, their standards are really high. If there's an issue, they expect it to be solved quickly. Well, if you go to games like, Rocket League or games which are maybe a bit more in the shadow, there's often no expectations really. They're happy to get their travel covered or their hotel covered already. So with those games, it's often you can't really do anything wrong unless you really mess up. Well, with Counter-Strike, it's the polar opposite. Anything that you do wrong most of the time. Basically, you can only fail. And if everything goes well, it's just another event done, for the players at least. I think that's it. Thank you all.